Inside Attica Prison. In rural New York, surrounded by quiet farmland, there is a prison whose name became synonymous with state power, resistance, and bloodshed. Attica Correctional Facility was never meant to be famous. But in 1971, it became the site of the deadliest prison uprising in American history. What happened inside Attica lasted only 4 days. The consequences have lasted more than 50 years. This is not a story built on legend or exaggeration. It is a story preserved in official records, court findings, and public testimony. This is Inside Attica Prison. Before we go deeper, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Life Behind Bars. Your support helps us continue producing factual, in-depth documentaries on the most important prison stories in history. Why Attica was built. Attica Correctional Facility opened in 1931 as a maximum security prison for the state of New York. Its design reflected early 20th century prison philosophy: large cell blocks, strict discipline, and centralized control. Attica was intended to house individuals convicted of serious crimes, many serving long or life sentences. Over time, the prison grew more crowded. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, Attica held more than 2,200 men in a facility designed for fewer. Most incarcerated men were Black or Latino. Most correctional officers were white. Nearly all positions of authority were held by white staff. The imbalance was not incidental. It shaped daily life inside the prison. Life inside Attica before 1971. By the early 1970s, conditions inside Attica were widely described as harsh. Prisoners were confined to their cells for long periods. Wages for prison labor were extremely low. Basic necessities such as showers, medical care, and adequate food were limited. Political organizing among prisoners was restricted. Reading materials were censored. Religious and cultural expression was tightly controlled. Complaints were routinely ignored. Despite growing frustration, there had been no large-scale revolt. Tension existed, but it remained contained, until September 1971. The spark. On September 8, 1971, a confrontation between prisoners and correctional officers escalated. The immediate trigger involved a dispute following the punishment of 2 prisoners and the use of tear gas. What followed was rapid and chaotic. The next morning, prisoners seized control of a large section of the prison known as D-Yard. Correctional officers and civilian employees were taken hostage. Within hours, Attica was no longer under state control. What began as unrest became a full-scale uprising. The prisoners' demands. Once in control of D-Yard, prisoners organized. They formed security teams, medical units, and negotiation committees. Observers later noted the level of discipline and coordination inside the occupied yard. Prisoners issued a list of demands. These included improved living conditions, political rights, religious freedom, fair wages, and amnesty for actions taken during the uprising. Importantly, the demands did not initially include escape. The prisoners wanted change, not freedom beyond the walls. State officials were notified. Negotiations began. The standoff. For 4 days, Attica remained in a state of tense negotiation. National observers, journalists, and civilian mediators were brought in. The world watched as discussions unfolded inside the yard. Inside Attica, prisoners and hostages lived in close quarters under constant uncertainty. Outside Attica, political pressure mounted. The state of New York faced a choice: continue negotiating, or take the prison back by force. A decision made. On the morning of September 13, 1971, the decision was made. State authorities ordered law enforcement to retake Attica Correctional Facility. What followed would leave 43 people dead and permanently alter the history of American prisons. The morning of the assault. On the morning of September 13, 1971, Attica Correctional Facility was surrounded by hundreds of state and local law enforcement officers. The decision to retake the prison had been finalized at the highest levels of New York state government. Negotiations were ended. A tactical plan was approved. Prisoners inside D-Yard were not informed that an assault was imminent. Shortly after 9 a.m., helicopters flew low over the prison yard and released tear gas. Within seconds, visibility inside the yard collapsed. The retaking of D-Yard. As tear gas spread, state troopers and correctional officers moved in. Gunfire followed. The assault lasted only minutes, but the scale of force was overwhelming. Prisoners attempted to surrender, waving white cloths and raising their hands. When the shooting stopped, the yard was under state control again. 39 men were dead. 10 were hostages, correctional officers and civilian employees. 29 were prisoners. Contrary to early official claims, All hostages were later found to have died from gunfire fired by law enforcement, not from actions taken by prisoners. Immediate aftermath. In the hours following the retaking of Attica, surviving prisoners were stripped, beaten, and forced to crawl through mud and broken glass. These actions were later documented through testimony, photographs, and medical records. Many prisoners were denied immediate medical care. Some suffered severe injuries unrelated to the gunfire. At the same time, officials released public statements that falsely accused prisoners of murdering hostages by slashing their throats. Those claims would later be proven untrue. The official narrative. In the days following the assault, state officials defended their actions. They described the retaking as necessary and blamed prisoners for the deaths that occurred. Graphic and misleading accounts were released to the public. For years the false narrative persisted. Autopsies eventually revealed that hostages died from bullets fired by state forces, but this information was not immediately acknowledged. The truth emerged slowly, through investigation, litigation, and public pressure. Survivors in silence. Surviving prisoners were transferred, isolated, and disciplined. Some were charged with crimes related to the uprising. Many faced retaliation inside the prison system. Correctional officers who participated in post-assault abuse were not criminally prosecuted at the time. For decades, accountability was limited. Attica became a symbol, not only of resistance but of institutional silence. Legal fallout. Legal battles followed for years. Prisoners and families of those killed filed lawsuits alleging excessive force, abuse, and civil rights violations. These cases moved slowly through the courts. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, the state of New York reached settlements with surviving prisoners and families of the victims. The state did not formally admit wrongdoing, but compensation was paid. Attica's national impact. Attica changed the national conversation about prisons. It exposed conditions inside maximum security facilities. It revealed how quickly negotiations could give way to force. It highlighted racial and power imbalances embedded in the system. The uprising influenced prison policy, litigation, journalism, and public awareness for generations. Attica was no longer just a prison. It became a warning. The prison that remained. Attica Correctional Facility did not close. It continued operating. Men continued serving sentences inside its walls. Officers continued working there. But the prison carried a permanent mark. Every conversation about prison uprisings, use of force, and inmate rights now included one word. Attica. Attica after 1971. After the uprising and retaking, Attica did not become a relic of history. It remained an active maximum security prison, operating under intense scrutiny. In the immediate years following 1971, New York State implemented limited reforms. Some prison policies were adjusted. Certain conditions improved incrementally. But Attica was never rebuilt from the ground up. The same walls stood. The same cell blocks remained. The same power structure largely endured. The prison carried the weight of its past into every decision that followed. Changes inside the prison. Following the uprising, authorities introduced procedural changes intended to reduce unrest. Prisoner grievance systems were expanded. Access to legal materials improved. Certain restrictions on reading materials and correspondence were eased. However, discipline remained strict, and security concerns continued to dominate institutional priorities. For many incarcerated men, daily life at Attica changed slowly and unevenly. Accountability and limits. Despite the scale of violence in 1971, criminal accountability for state officials was limited. Investigations into the assault and its aftermath took years. Some inquiries stalled. Others were closed without charges. Families of those killed, both prisoners and hostages, fought for answers and recognition. In 2000, New York State issued a formal expression of regret for the uprising and its handling decades after the event. For many, the acknowledgement came too late. Attica, Indiana public memory. Attica entered the American consciousness as more than a prison. It became a symbol of resistance, state violence, and the consequences of ignoring human conditions behind bars. The uprising influenced civil rights movements, prison reform efforts, and cultural works across decades. The phrase "Remember Attica" became shorthand for institutional failure and unchecked authority. The prison today. Today, Attica Correctional Facility still operates as a maximum security prison. It houses individuals serving long sentences for serious crimes. Security remains tight. The facility continues to be staffed and managed by the state. While conditions have changed since 1971, Attica remains defined by its history. Every policy decision exists in the shadow of what happened there. What Attica left behind. Attica forced the nation to confront questions it had long avoided. How much force can the state use in the name of order? What happens when grievances go unanswered? Who is held accountable when the system itself causes harm? Those questions remain unresolved. The men who survived. Not everyone who lived through Attica in 1971 became part of the official record. Hundreds of prisoners survived the assault, the beatings, and the aftermath. Many were transferred to other facilities across New York State. Others remained inside Attica itself. For these men, survival did not mean resolution. Some carried permanent physical injuries. Others described lasting psychological effects tied to the violence, humiliation, and fear experienced after the prison was retaken. Their accounts would emerge slowly, often years later, through sworn testimony, interviews, and court filings. The long road to recognition. For decades, survivors and families of those killed sought acknowledgement from the state. Investigations moved slowly. Records were sealed or delayed. Key evidence remained inaccessible for years. It was not until the late 1990s and early 2000s that some families received formal recognition through settlements and public statements. Even then, many felt justice was incomplete. No state officials were criminally convicted for the deaths that occurred during the retaking of Attica. The absence of accountability became part of Attica's legacy. Attica and prison policy. Attica influenced prison policy across the United States in ways that were both direct and indirect. Some states expanded grievance systems and oversight mechanisms. Others invested in tactical response units and emergency preparedness. In some cases, Attica led to reform. In others, it led to greater militarization. The uprising became a reference point, cited in training, litigation, and policy debates for decades. Attica was studied not only as a failure but as a warning. Why Attica still matters. Attica matters because it exposed what happens when a closed system refuses to listen. It showed how quickly negotiation can collapse, how easily truth can be distorted, and how long it can take for facts to replace official narratives. The prison uprising was not inevitable, but it was predictable. That distinction is why Attica continues to be taught, referenced, and debated more than 50 years later. A story without an end. Attica did not end with the retaking of the yard. It continued in courtrooms, in families, in policies, and in memory. Every discussion about prison violence, state force, and accountability traces back to the same question Attica raised in 1971. What happens when power is absolute, and oversight arrives too late? That question remains unanswered. Final reflection. Attica was not an accident. It was the result of tension, neglect, and power colliding in a closed system. The uprising lasted 4 days. Its legacy has lasted more than half a century. Attica stands as a reminder that prisons are not sealed off from society, they are reflections of it. Attica remains standing. Its walls still rise from the fields of upstate New York. Its cells still hold men serving long sentences. And its name still carries the weight of what happened inside. The events of 1971 were not just a moment of violence. They were the result of conditions ignored, voices silenced, and power exercised without accountability. Attica forced the nation to confront uncomfortable truths about incarceration, authority, and human dignity, questions that remain unresolved to this day. As long as prisons exist, the lessons of Attica matter. Thanks for watching Life Behind Bars.